We come to the steps of the Capitol in a spirit of community and love for the people of the Virgin Islands and of Puerto Rico. As we all know, this fall, Hurricane Irma and Maria devastated the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Our fellow Americans are still waiting for food, water, and relief. They need our help, and they need it now. It is long overdue. This is a challenge to the conscience of our nation. We are gathered on the steps of the Capitol to demand real life-saving action from the administration. Thank you to our members for keeping up the drumbeat of action and for shining a light on this crisis. And the press has done that too, and we hope you will continue to do so. And with gratitude to the FEMA folks who are down there coming from all over the country to be helpful, and to our military who is there as well. But it is too little, it has been too little, too late. The administration has failed to devote the urgent attention that this national catastrophe deserves. Instead of delivering hope and doing everything in his power to deliver relief, the president has patted himself on the back and gave him a grade of 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Well, we are all striving for that 10. House Democrats are fighting for recovery funding for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands so that they can rebuild. We are supporting $8 billion in Medicaid funding for Puerto Rico and waiving its local cost share. Cost share is an actual barrier to success. We will keep turning up the heat to bring relief and recovery to our fellow Americans still living a nightmare. We are so grateful to our colleagues in the Congress, Congressman Gutierrez, Congresswoman Plaskett, Congresswoman Velazquez, Congressman Soto, Congressman Serrano, who have their local ties to the community. You'll be hearing from them, as well as our distinguished Whip Hoyer and our chair of our caucus, Mr. Crowley. Everyone here on the steps has something to say about this. We are all praying for the people of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We do not want anyone to prey on their difficulties. We want support. We want to give them hope. Where is hope? I always say it's sitting right there between faith, belief in ourselves and the future and in God, and love, the compassion and charity that we all have in our hearts. From that faith, hope, and charity, we hope to give them hope, and we have a way to do it in the Congress. My pleasure now to yield to a very strong leader on this subject, whose idea it was for us to come to the steps, stand in front of this dome, pronounce our commitment to the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Congressman Luis Gutierrez.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Leader Pelosi, and thank you to all of my colleagues. And thank you for wearing the beautiful little badge that was prepared. And of course, Stacy, when we prepared it, we put first the Virgin Islands and then the sticker for the island of Puerto Rico, because we're one. And thank you for your wonderful leadership, and thank you, Leader Pelosi. I want to first say that this is more than about Puerto Rican members of the House of Representatives and those of Puerto Rican descent. We have had marvelous meetings. Marcy Kaptur, who's way back there, and McGovern from Massachusetts, and just so many members. Rosa DeLauro is just doing a fantastic job back in Connecticut. And I want to say thank you to my friend from New York also, Congressman Espaillat. He's been on 2 trips with me to Puerto Rico. I thank him for his solidarity and his commitment to the rebuilding of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And I want to say to my colleagues, my fellow Puerto Rican colleagues, to Nidia Velazquez, no one has raised their voice more loudly and more firmly for the people of Puerto Rico than she. And I am so proud to have been in her class. We arrived here together in '92. Of course, our senior statesman, Jose Serrano, who has never been wavering in his support for the island of Puerto Rico. And our newest, but certainly very dynamic leader, Darian Soto. And Darian, you have such a huge responsibility, and we need to be there for you, because we know that we are receiving them in Massachusetts, we are receiving them in Connecticut, we're receiving them in Ohio, we're receiving them in Chicago, but over 70,000, over 80,000 in the state of Florida. We need to be there for you. So I know I think it's important that we say thank you. And one last one, and you never finish, but I want to take this moment in my time to say thank you. And thank you to Steny Hoyer, who went on a trip, but didn't just take the helicopter ride, who went and got in a car and went to Utuado, Puerto Rico. Now, Utuado, Puerto Rico, as those of us of Puerto Rican descent know, is in the interior of the island, is in the mountains of Puerto Rico. It is where you see the true devastation, and it is where you see the lack of commitment of the government of the United States of America. And I just have to say, it just seems that Donald Trump doesn't care about us, because we're 7 weeks into this and there are still people 80% without electricity and hundreds of thousands without water. That is a disgrace, and that is unacceptable. And I thank my colleagues of the Democratic Caucus for standing up for the Virgin Islands and for Puerto Rico and saying, America can do better, America must do better. We will make sure she does justice to the people of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We will not accept anything less, and we will never remain silent as we see the abuse that is occurring, because it is abuse. Whitefish, a contract from Montana, 2 employees, $300 million. That's disgraceful also. I mean, I want you to think. People have AIDS and need the medication and the refrigeration. Children need their formula. People need their insulin if they're diabetics. Hospitals are going to crash because the generators don't work. That's wrong. Electricity is life, because it is what pumps the water to people's homes. It isn't just who got the contract for selling coffee at the airport or repaving or cleaning the Capitol. All those things are wrong when they're insider deals. But this is actually criminal when you take the health and safety of the people of Puerto Rico in a moment of disaster and you try to exploit it for your own personal gain and line your pocket because you happen to be someone in line. That's wrong. So I thank my colleagues for going, and I say continue to go. I know they're not making it easy for us to get to Puerto Rico to see what's happening. They're not making it easy for us, right? If it was Paris, France, I'm sure they'd make it easy. I'm sure if it was somewhere else, but not Puerto Rico. So I encourage my colleagues, and I turn around to you and say, buy those tickets, get on those airplanes. Ask me and Nidia and Jose and others, and we will tell you how you can get to the interior of the island and see the true plight of the people of Puerto Rico. And to Leader Pelosi, thank you once again for embracing this idea, as you embrace so many wonderful ideas of your members of your caucus. And I'm so delighted and happy that you are leading us at this very, very critical juncture and time in Puerto Rico. Thank you so much, Leader.
And now to us.
Oh.
Okay.
And now my colleague from the Virgin Islands, who I'm so proud to serve with, Congresswoman
Thank you,
Cassidy.
Luis. Thank you. Thank you to my Puerto Rican brothers and sisters, and thank you to all of you who are here on the steps of the Capitol. Today is November 2nd, and more than 75% of the residents of the U.S. Virgin Islands are still without power, going on 2 months. Could you imagine that happening in any other place other than the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico? It would be unacceptable anywhere else. Hurricane Irma devastated the islands of St. Thomas and St. John on September 6th, followed by Maria on September 19th. Our hospitals, Roy Schneider Medical Center, the only hospital on the island of St. Thomas, was partially destroyed after Irma, and all of the patients were evacuated to St. Croix, to the Juan Luis Hospital, the only functioning hospital left in the Virgin Islands. 3 weeks later, Maria hit St. Croix, and the Juan Luis Hospital has now been condemned by the Army Corps of Engineers. That means we no longer have capacity to take care of patients with critical needs. All dialysis patients, inpatients, have been evacuated from the islands away from family and friends. Residents forced to stay on long lines to get critical supplies. Before the hurricane, our islands were rich with lush vegetation, which has been uprooted and covered with rubble. We are in blackness with no power. The difference in our landscape is so stark that our absence can be detected from space. Mail now takes over a month to reach citizens with critical supplies. Some of our children are still not in school November 2nd. Those who are in school share space with other schools in condensed classrooms running on generators, eating MREs for lunch in many places. Every aspect of our life in the Virgin Islands have been impacted by the storms. Our people are fighting to put their lives back together. And today is the day that the United States Congress, the White House, everyday citizens must make a sustained commitment to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. A commitment not only to clean up the mess that the hurricanes left behind, but to work with us in the coming years and months to rebuild. I want to thank the members of the community, and as my colleague Luis Gutierrez says, to thank the FEMA workers that are there on the ground. Thank the Department of Defense people that are there supporting the people of the Virgin Islands. But it's not enough. I'd like to thank Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer for his recent trip to the Virgin Islands. He and Kevin McCarthy led a congressional delegation to the Virgin Islands to survey the damage and engage in dialogue with local government and citizens. I want to thank our leader, Nancy Pelosi, for bringing us all out here to have you hear about the work that still needs to be done, to press Congress to continue. Thank you to my colleagues, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, for being there on the ground with the people. And thanks so many of you for making the effort to come out. It's not easy. Obviously, it's not, because President Trump still has not been to the Virgin Islands to see the devastation there. It was too inconvenient for him, but others have made the trip, and we're grateful. Given the enormity of the challenges in the coming months and years, we will require a coordinated and sustained commitment from the federal government, a commitment that they and this Congress have not given the Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands even before the storms impacted us. That is the reason that we have so much of the damages we have, because we have not gotten our fair share to begin with, to be able to build ourselves ready to sustain Category 5 hurricanes, which will come again, because climate change is real. For this reason, I ask the members of Congress to fully support our total inclusion and funding for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands in forthcoming disaster aid packages. Thanks so many of you who are making that push, who are helping the people of the Virgin Islands. We all say thank you. Thank you for your support. And as they say, VI strong, and Puerto Rico se levanta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacy, Luis, and I will be introducing Nydia when I close. As you heard, I just returned from a visit to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, along with Representative Norma Torres and Anthony Brown, as well as the Republican leader, McCarthy, from the state of California. In addition, Rob Bishop, who chairs the Natural Resources Committee that has jurisdiction over the territories, and Jeff Denham from California. Stacy Plaskett took us around St. Croix. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, she took us to a tour of St. Croix where we saw homes destroyed, a school condemned, and a hospital severely limited in its ability to treat patients. From there, we continued to Puerto Rico, where ours was the first bipartisan, multi-member congressional delegation to visit the island's interior. There was concern about that, and it was difficult to get them to agree, Jose, that we would go to the interior. But we did. And it was said that we drove in cars. We drove in cars part of the way But with Governor Rosselló and the mayor of Puerto with us, we walked a street that was almost destroyed, that mudslides had almost obliterated, homes almost covered with mud. This was 6 weeks after the event. From there, we continued to Puerto Rico, where ours was the first, as I said, bipartisan delegation. What we saw in Puerto Rico was heartbreaking. Families displaced, millions without power, clean drinking water, food, or medication, roads and bridges washed out. Some in our delegation walked down into the river path, the riverbed, crossed the river, walked up a ladder, climbed up a ladder 50 feet in height to see some folks who were stranded on the other side, who had devised a way in a shopping basket with the wheels off to go from the road on which we were located to the other side for medicine and food. That was their conveyor belt that they had jury-rigged because that was the way they were going to be able to feed their families and provide for their health care. Hopefully, all of us were motivated to do everything necessary. A flag flies over the Capitol of the United States. Another flag flies over the United States Senate. Another flag over the Supreme Court of the United States. And other flags over the House of Representatives. We pledge allegiance to those flags. And in that pledge we say, one nation, under God, indivisible. The Americans in the Virgin Islands, the Americans in Puerto Rico, believe, and we must affirm, that when we say indivisible, they are with us. The representative of Guam stands here with us as well. Not devastated, but like Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, Americans all, indivisible. I was encouraged that Leader McCarthy and his Republican colleagues were with us to witness the devastation and the resilience of our fellow Americans working to overcome this natural disaster. I believe we can work together in a bipartisan way. I believe we must work together in a bipartisan way to ensure that the affected areas receive the resources they need from Congress. Those Americans ought to expect no less than those in Houston and in Florida. Thousands of first responders, led by FEMA and our men and women in the military, have performed their jobs. But as Luis said, not enough, not quickly enough, and not with enough resources. In addition, let me say this. We must rebuild to 21st century standards. The Stafford Act says we rebuild that which was. If we rebuild to that which was, it will again be destroyed at some time in the future, and we will have to pay again. We were on Marathon Key, and we saw housing that was constructed post-Andrew at post-Andrew building standards, and those that were constructed before. Those that were constructed to 21st century still stood. Those that were not were destroyed. We must rebuild to 21st standards. I continue to call on President Trump to make certain not only that we will not leave, but that before we leave, everything will be done that needs to be done. We must do all we can. Delay is not an option. Louise said she was one of the strongest voices that we hear. One of the most dynamic, most energetic, most passionate, most committed of advocates. how lucky the Puerto Rican people are to have two extraordinary women like Nydia Velasquez and Stacy Plaskett raising their voices on behalf of those who have been hurt by storms. They will not and must not be hurt by our neglect. Ladies and gentlemen, Nydia Velasquez from New York.
Thank you, Stanley, and our Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, my brothers and sisters, my colleagues from the Democratic caucus, Stacy, and all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I was in Puerto Rico this past weekend. I went to Vieques, Humacao, and my hometown in Jabucoa. I can tell you today that it has been one of the most painful experiences that I have ever gone through. I said it before, the Puerto Rico that I knew doesn't exist anymore. But this trip corroborated what we have been saying all along. The federal government failed the people of Puerto Rico. This president, who has been occupied with so many petty stuff, instead of being the leader of the free world and protecting and taking care of those most in need. Stacy, yes, indeed, he went to Puerto Rico. He didn't go to the Virgin Islands. But his trip to Puerto Rico was basically to go to San Juan and throw paper towels. It was an insult to the people of Puerto Rico. It shows a lack of compassion and inability to demonstrate empathy from people that are suffering and people that are dying. But here we are again. We held a press conference last week with nurses, volunteer nurses that went to Puerto Rico. They shared their stories of what they witnessed and what they saw. What they saw should concern every American, because that is not the way that we should treat fellow Americans. With snack for food, with 2 bottles of water for a family of 6, if they were lucky enough to get those packages. He went to the metropolitan area that did not provide a real picture of those who are without drinking water and without power. We expected more from the leader of the free world. And as Steny Hoyer said, this is the American flag, and in our Constitution there is no distinction between American citizens here in the mainland and American citizens in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, American citizens who have gone and fought for this country in every war since 1917. So my message to you, Mr. President, we are not going away, and we will use every legislative power that we have, every tool at our disposal. But it is the responsibility of our government to make the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands whole, and we will not rest. We promise you, the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, you are watching us. Our promise to you is you are not alone. We are here standing on these steps to send a message to you that we are in solidarity with the people of the Virgin Islands and the people of Puerto Rico, with the children of Puerto Rico that at this time of the year should be in a classroom, but they have no power, no electricity with 90 degrees weather. Shame on us. Shame on us when we treat the children, our American children, this way. And I beg you, the cameras, I know that you are covering so many stories that some might consider sensational or fake news, and that is important because we have to make sure to the American people that our democratic institutions will not be undermined. But I beg you, please, don't turn off your cameras on the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We need to bring that human face, because we know that when the American public knows how our fellow citizens are being treated, they will demand action from this Congress. It's not enough for Republicans to shut down debate or shut down a hearing. Why did you do that? Because you are afraid of the truth? You could shut down congressional debates, you could shut down any hearings. You will not allow for the people to know the truth, but we are not going away. God bless you, and I thank all of you for being here. I would like to call on my brother, Darren Soto, from Florida.
It's been over 40 days since Hurricane Maria hit both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We have nearly 80% of those in Puerto Rico still without power, and even more than that, still without power in the Virgin Islands. It has become the biggest blackout in American history. It's been the most hours of Americans without power in American history at this point. And for the people of Puerto Rico, I want to say that we see you. To the people of the Virgin Islands, we see you. To our colleague, Stacey Plaskett, we're with you. But the question is, how long is this going to persist? How long are people going to be able to stay without going back to work? How long are our students, our young people, not going to be able to go back to school? How long are our seniors going to have to wait to get medicines and to have access to health care? How long is it before the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands get their lives back? We still don't have the air support we've asked for weeks ago. We asked weeks ago for there to be helicopters to send out daily supplies to these rural enclaves like Utuado. That still has not happened to this date. How much do we have to stand on our desks and scream for the administration to get the message? Over 80,000 of my fellow Puerto Ricans have arrived in Florida, in the great Sunshine State, since Maria. 80,000. And many have come to Central Florida, and we have opened our arms and we have opened our houses even after our state was struck with Hurricane Irma. But our cities and our towns and our counties in Central Florida and in South Florida also need the help of the federal government to help these over 80,000 folks, some of whom will go back, some of whom will make the Sunshine State their home. But over the long haul, our whip, Steny Hoyer, said it best in that we need to rebuild Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands with a grid that is better, more resilient, and provides more renewable energy options. I say we take the offer of Elon Musk and make Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands a model for America for renewable energy. That we look at this as an opportunity to experiment with the future of energy in this country. And we also need healthcare funding, Medicare funding for the islands that are granted without a cost share. Is it some cruel joke to require the islands when they have no money? We just gave them a $4.9 billion loan, and we're going to ask them to come up with funding to get the healthcare dollars that they need? It's absurd. All it takes, whether it's the grid, whether it's food and water, whether it's healthcare, is the vision and will to get this done and provide the resources to do it, and I urge my colleagues in Congress to do the same. And with that, I want to recognize and have come up Congressman Serrano, who is our senior appropriator among our Puerto Rico caucus here, who has been fighting on a daily basis to make sure that the funding that needs to happen in Congress is bringing the needed resources to both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Congressman Serrano.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Leader Pelosi, Steny, our whip, Joe Crowley, and all of my colleagues who every single day come up to me, come up to Luis and Nydia and say, you know, is there any way we can help? Is there more that we can do? Well, this is what we need to do. We need to continue to lift our voices and let the government know, our government know, that it has to do more, that it did too little and it did it too late. And you know, I'm known to be one who sticks to certain subjects and doesn't spend time necessarily attacking people, but you know, I've been so insulted. And I'll repeat some of what we heard already, but it is insulting. You know, when you go to an island like Puerto Rico, and you're the president of that island too, and you say, you know, you're breaking my budget, you're breaking my budget. There are so many places as an appropriator that I can show you where we're breaking the budget. It's not Puerto Rico that's breaking the budget. Puerto Rico is an emergency. The Virgin Islands is an emergency. It's a humanitarian crisis, and it has to be dealt with. I had a very undistinguished military career. What do I mean by that? I served the time that I was drafted for, then I came home. You know, there are people who are real heroes, and I'm not one of them. But, Mr. President, in Puerto Rico right now, unable to get food, unable to get water, unable to get medicine, are many, many, many veterans. Some in good health, thank God, and some with war-related injuries that they've carried since Korea or the Second World War, and who knows, even the First World War, because we were in that war too. If you do it for no one else, then do it with the thought of veterans in mind. And don't insult us anymore by practicing your basketball shots by throwing towels to paper towels to a group of people that hadn't seen a paper towel roll for weeks. There's an insensitive feeling, a sense that we are forgotten. I've spent my 27 years in Congress saying, don't forget the territories. Don't forget the territories. But that was a mantra on my part. I didn't really understand how it could take shape. Oh, I knew in appropriations how it took shape, that whatever money was left over went to the territories. But now, when I hear a president say, Puerto Rico's an island surrounded by water. Thank you, Mr. President. I learned that when I was in the 3rd grade. And he says, you can't drive a truck up to it. How insulting, how insensitive. Well, I say this, in 1898, with less equipment, you were able to invade Puerto Rico. Why can't we now send help with a friendly invasion of goods and necessary things? Now, Puerto Ricans will not give up, and we will not give up, and our leadership will not give up. But our president, our Congress, our Senate, our House, the other party needs to understand that we're not talking about foreign aid. We're talking about American citizens. If you tomorrow go with me to Puerto Rico and establish residence there, because of the status, you'll lose some rights that you have now, but you will remain a citizen. You won't need a passport. You won't need anything different than what you have now. So with that in mind, Mr. President, with that in mind, to the other party, please do something seriously to help Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands now that we need it. Shame on us. The world is looking at how much we meddle in other places, how much we've rebuilt other places, and we don't rebuild Puerto Rico. And one last point. If there was something I learned in the military, is that the military can do whatever it is asked to do. They can go into a town, they're seen by most of the people as a fighting machine, but they're also a building machine. They can build a town. They could put a telephone tower up. They can get lights and electricity running back. They can get medicine. They can get doctors. They have a medical corps. That's the one I was in. They have people that can do whatever needs to be done. Let's get boots on the ground the way we do in some other places that we may disagree with. Let's do it for the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands in a positive place. I am fortunate in New York to have, as I have here in Congress, allies that I work with all the time and who look out for me when I'm in trouble, of any political trouble. And that's good to remind people. And one of them is Nydia Velasquez, and the other one is our next speaker, the chairman of our caucus, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Joseph. Jose, let me thank the House leadership, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and all the leadership of the rank and file that are here today. But in particular, let me thank my friend and colleagues, Nydia Velasquez, Jose Serrano, Darren Soto, Stacy Plaskett. Without their voices, I think that much of what we're talking about today would have gone unanswered. I had the opportunity just last week to visit Puerto Rico, saw most of the damage by air, the devastation by air. And let me say this, the word catastrophic is the only word that can be used to describe what happened in Puerto Rico and what I am told has happened in the Virgin Islands, what I've seen by the television coverage. Empathy is something that we are taught at a very early age in life. I don't think we actually go to school and go to a class and learn empathy. It's something that we're taught at the foot of our parents and our grandparents and our relatives, our teachers, our friends and families throughout life of nurturing. What I've asked of the President is to show some empathy here. The ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Mr. President, I know that you've never had to worry in your life about where your next meal will come from, nor have I. I know you've never had to worry about whether you would have access to clean water, nor have I. I know you don't know what it's like to go hours upon hours and days without power, and nor have I. But I question whether or not you have the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Demonstrate to the American people, demonstrate to the American citizens of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands that you can do that. We have so much more work to do, to bring Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands back. They may not deserve more than that, but they certainly deserve no less.
Good. As we began talking about giving the people of Puerto Rico hope, we said some of that should spring from faith in the goodness of others. That's why our lapel signs here have two hearts, one for Puerto Rico, one for the Virgin Islands there. In California, as you know, we've had the fires, and there's a big sign there. It said, "Love in the air is thicker than the smoke." We have to make sure that love in the air is thicker than the disdain or the ignoring of what is happening in Puerto Rico. We know that the hearts of our members are full of love. We want that reflected in how that is conveyed in goods, services, and respect for the people of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Thank you, my colleagues.
Thank you.